Okay, I should be recording.
Hi everyone, my name is Matthew Patunka and I'm a Cloud Solution Architect for Microsoft.
Hey everybody, my name is John Lunn, aka Johnny Chips, and I'm a technical architect and I work for BT Enterprise in the UK.
My name is Ahmed Laja and I'm a Cloud Solution Architect at Microsoft.
Hi, I'm Anna McNally. I'm a Cloud Solution Architect at Microsoft.
Hi, my name is George Washira. I work for the Intellectual Property Office as a Senior Engineer for the End User Services.
I'm Richard Griffiths and I'm the Cloud Solutions Architect at Confused.com.
Hi, I'm Abul Kaya. I work as a Technical Payment Specialist for Clearbank.
There we go. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Welsh Azure User Group Virtual Meetup on the 18th of February 2021. As you can see, we've just been having a little pre-conference fun with Scott there, taking us through his awesome setup that he's got there. Just a quick video. We put this together for the user group just so you guys can know who's actually behind the scenes organising these events for you and obviously giving you all this great information. And obviously kudos and thanks so much for Scott and obviously John Savill who will be joining us a little bit later. If you need to reach out to us, you've got our names on the screen. We've got a LinkedIn profile, so there's Twitter. Obviously we're here. This is your user group. Obviously we're trying to put this content together and just get you information that we feel you would need. But obviously any suggestions, reach out to any one of us. So without further ado, I mean, we've got a few announcements now before we actually get into the great talks that we got lined up tonight. Obviously, we've got a sort of 10 minutes, so we're just going to run through a few announcements and a few bits and pieces. Obviously, we've got Scott, who's going to talk to us around moving his blog essentially into Linux and containers and putting that into Azure App Service within Azure. Fantastic journey and great to see that kind of real life application of doing something in production. And then John Savill will be joining us around about 7 o'clock then, and he's going to talk to us all a bit around how do we stay resilient within Azure? You know, what happens when it falls down? You can't sort of get your infrastructure back up. Just some good sort of guidance and hints around that. As always, we've got our Kahoot quiz. We got two £50 Amazon vouchers, and I think what we'll do again this week is we'll probably give a first prize winner. And if you stick around to the very last slide and click on the QR code and give us some feedback, we will pick a winner at random there to win another £50 voucher. So yeah, approximate close. We're aiming for around 8 o'clock. Obviously, as you'll agree now, this is going to be quite an awesome event now with Scott and John. Some housekeeping rules. Please, could everybody stay on mute? You've got control of your own mute buttons. Be courteous to each other. If you've got any questions, there's no such thing as a silly question. Put it in the chat. The chat is active and enabled. If there's anything you want to ask, just put it in that chat. And like I say, stay on mute unless you're invited to speak by the speaker. Like I said, please don't forget to leave feedback at the end of the event. It's really important to us and it kind of helps us mold and shape the future events that we've got coming up. And don't forget to install the Kahoot app. If you're new to Kahoot, if you've got a kahoot.com, you can use it on your PC, or you can download the app on your iPhone or Android device. And we'll be using that for the quiz a little bit later. Okay, on that note, just a quick word from both of our sponsors. So I think, Andy, are you on the line there? Do you want to just say hello?
I am. Hi, thanks, John. Yeah, I'm Andy Norris. I'm Azure Project Manager for Servant, who's one of the sponsors for this evening's event. Who are we? Servant are an Azure consultancy based in Scotland, but operating across the world. We specialise in data migration and exits. We're also a leading UK partner for WVD, having reached a big milestone this week with one of our customers, 72,000 seats in WVD, so we're quite proud of that achievement. And we're also a leading partner in the UK for AVS, for Azure VMware Solution, helping customers to accelerate their migration away from on-premise VMware into Azure-based VMware. And that's Servant in a nutshell. Obviously, I'll be on the call for the rest of the evening. So if you've got questions that you want to know about what we do, then just drop us a line on the chat bar and I'll respond there.
Thanks, Andy. Brilliant. Yeah, as always, these user groups in the virtual environment, they don't take a lot of finance and things like that to put forward, but things like prizes and stuff like that. Big shout out to Servant, and also our second sponsor of our group, which is obviously a local Welsh headquartered company called Admiral that you may be familiar with if you're based in the UK. Big shout out to those guys. I don't think we've got Luke on the call tonight, but as always, thanks to both of our sponsors. A quick heads up I know we haven't even got this one off the ground yet, but for our next meetup, we've tried to change it up a little bit. We've decided to go for a series of lightning talks. So that's coming up on the 18th of March. We've got some fantastic community speakers dotted around UK and wider into Europe. So mark the date in your diaries, sign up onto the Meet Me event, and obviously we look forward to seeing you at that event as well. And on that note, Anna, over to you for a couple of announcements.
Amazing. Thanks, John. Evening, everyone. Just super quickly before we get involved with handing over to Scott, I'm one of the ambassadors here at Microsoft for Women in Tech, and I support a number of schools in Wales, and I do that by helping children or young adults become curious or interested in technology. So I know everyone, or the majority of you, are working from home at the moment, and you've possibly got your children at home as well. So I wanted to make you aware and share a number of the initiatives that Microsoft are running, and these initiatives are free. So there's a few slides and initiatives on the screen that you'll see now. The first one is the EduConnect Day, and this is in March. So as you can see on the screen, it's really exciting. It's all about getting the children hands-on, and they'll build their own website on HTML, and there's some amazing keynote speakers as well. So if you're interested, please sign up. I won't cover all the events now, but we're going to drop the URLs in the chat channel. Feel free to share these links with any schools that you have contact with or connection with. And if you're interested in any of these, or you want to understand a little bit more, feel free to reach out with me. If I'm not connected to the school, I'll make an effort to get connected. So yeah, thank you. I'll hand back to you now, John. Thanks for that.
No, thanks, Anna. So yeah, just the series, there's a few images on the screen there. So we've got the Mission Earth series with the URL there. You've got the 2021 AI and Sustainability, the International Women's DigiGirls Day. So there's some dates there. Like I say, I've just put all the links in the chat channel there. And obviously the gaming day that we got coming up for DigiGirls as well. So yeah, if you've got young kids, as Anna said, bookmark those dates and get registered for that. Okay, onwards to tonight. We're going to run a secondary competition tonight. So this all involves winning some Microsoft exam vouchers. So what we want you to do is take a picture of yourself holding a piece of paper that you would have written on the next exam, the next Microsoft exam that you're looking to take. If you can tweet those out or put them on LinkedIn, tag us with our hashtag WAUG and at Welsh Azure. What we'll do, we'll pick our 10 favorites and we will make contact with you after the event, and we will get you a Microsoft exam voucher. So you can't really argue with that. Like I say, we've got 10 of those to give away. So the top 10 people that we find in the socials, we'll be getting a voucher. So onwards with tonight. I mean, it kind of goes, without saying how brilliantly proud and massively thankful to Scott Hanselman for joining us this evening. I mean, it's great to see the support that we get from the big guns of Microsoft and really appreciate it. On that note, I mean, the man needs no introduction. I think I'm going to hand over to you now, Scott, and take it away, please.
Hello. Happy to be here. Not a problem at all. I appreciate you all hanging out with me today. Let me share my screen and let's see if we can do some damage. And as we said before, we don't want a user group to be a YouTube channel. You can watch, you can certainly watch YouTube and see talks that I've given on YouTube. If you don't ask me questions, this becomes a YouTube show where I just talk at you. So please ask questions in the comments. If you feel really strongly about it, unmute and interrupt and say, hang on, that wasn't clear. Go back, talk about this. We don't have to talk about moving my blog to Azure. We can talk about setting up. We do, like we were at the beginning, we were talking about setting up our rooms so that we don't go insane during the pandemic. That's also a thing that we can do. So No worries at all. But since that was the topic you were promised, we'll talk about a few things involving my blog. Cool? All right. Here for the big blog move. Simon says, nope, I'm leaving. Otherwise, don't talk about anything but the blog. Okay. Hanselman.com is my blog, and it's part of the Hanselman global network of influence, which consists of dozens of employees, including just me. It's basically my website, my blog, my podcast. I have no employees. It's just me. It's not even really a business. But it's been running since, the 90s, and the blog has been up since 2002. So if we go over to the blog and we hit date, I think I started blogging in April of 2002. So it'll be coming up on, excuse me, 20 years next year. That's not good at all. And then the podcast is at hanselminutes.com. And the podcast is called Hansel Minutes because I am known to be an extraordinarily bad estimator. And people would say, how long do you think that'll take? And I'd be like, I don't know, like 30 minutes. And then they would say, is that Hansel minutes or like actual minutes? Because, you're not really reliable. That show has been going on for 775 plus episodes. And I'm very proud of the podcast. And one of the things that I think is worth pointing out about the podcast as I continue to speak while still paging down is that every one of those represents a person that's kicking ass in the community. And it's not just two dudes on Skype talking about JavaScript. I like to say that technology ideally should look like the mall, where you go into the community and you see people from all over. I want to point out that I'm still scrolling. So if you think that there's a pipeline problem in tech, you're mistaken. If I can find this many cool people to talk about cool stuff, then y'all can too, no matter what country folks are in. In fact, still scrolling. Please do check out the show. One of the great things about this as well is if you're putting on an event, a user group, a conference, or whatever, and if you're a well-meaning white guy in tech and you're like, I just can't find anyone to speak. I've got 700 people who've already proven themselves to be able to speak, so I would encourage you to use my show as a place to find your next great speaker. These are book authors, these are project owners, these are really cool people that do really cool stuff, and I've got hundreds of them, so check that out. So Hanselman.com/blog is an app. Hanselman.com proper is an app, a mini app of sorts with like the About Me and the speaking and whatnot, as well as I've got 3 different podcasts. So there's the podcast link that goes to Hansel Minutes, and then there's podcasts plural to talk about my other shows like Azure Friday and This Developer's Life. So all of this ran, and let me actually open up Notepad because this will be a good way to express this. Notepad. Let me pull it over from another monitor. Okay. Hanselman.com, Hanselman.com/blog, Hansel Minutes, and then the other sites. Now, I don't know about you, but if we go to DNS Simple, where I host my DNS, you can see that I have 51 failed startups. That are any minute I'm going to launch one of these into something special. It's really just a monument to my own failure is what this whole thing represents. These are all just different ideas for stuff that I thought would be a thing. Some of them like diabeticbooks.com, like that was going to be the next great thing, and it never really became a thing. This was one where I misspelled computer stuff they didn't teach you and actually paid for it, and I was just too embarrassed to not just keep it registered. So no one uses this domain, and it cost me $14 a year. So that's stupid. Babysmash.com, right? That's the taking over the world, babysmash.com. It's a game for babies that I made, and my baby is actually 15 now. This game was made for him when he was not 15, but it still exists, and I'm actually going to port it to .NET 5. So all of these domains are also things that need to be set up. A couple of years ago, I found that it was really hard to download SQL Server Express, and since Microsoft wasn't willing to actually fix that, I just made downloadSQLServerExpress.com and then redirected it to my own blog with links to the actual downloads. So now that's the #1 place that people go to download download SQL Server Express. Then I did the same thing for Visual Studio. I've got other domains. Oh, this is a lovely one. Check that out. HeyFriends.io. Huh? Hey, friends? T-shirts. Well, not free. T-shirts that you can buy with my catchphrase. All proceeds go to Black Girls Code. And if we log in to Hey Friends and we take a look at how we're doing here, beep boop bop boo, giving money, and Microsoft's going to match that. So take a look at heyfriends.io and buy yourself a nice shirt. And note that I do not have any shirts in like boring colors like black and gray. We only do loud, obnoxious shirts. So if you want to be the only person in Wales with a pink shirt that says Hey Friends on it, I got you. I got you covered. Okay. So all these domains, all these different things, all these things need to move up. So we've got these things and then, you know, like a dozen other sites and then a bunch of domains. Hanselman.com/blog was written in a thing called Das Blog. That's German for the blog. And that's literally what it means. Das Blog. You have to say it with a German accent. That was written in .NET 2 and web forms. Web forms. Hansel Minutes was written in Razor Pages using ASP.NET MVC 3. And Hanselman.com was also written in Razor Pages in MVC 2 or 3. Many, many, many years ago, there was a hoster called OrcsWeb here in the U.S. before the cloud existed, and they offered me when I was a Microsoft MVP 15 years ago free hosting. Then they got bought by a host called SureWeb that is Canadian, and then they're somewhere in Quebec. I forgot where I was hosted, and then things started breaking. Disks started filling up. Crazy stuff started happening. I would just basically remote desktop once a year into this machine that was given to me by OrcsWeb, and I would, update my blog, and it wasn't a big deal. And then they got bought, and no one ever called me and told me, hey, we got another person calls your thing. So then the blog went down, and I found out that OrcsWeb didn't exist. I called SureWeb, and I said, hey, my blog is down. And they said, who are you? And I said, well, I'm Scott Hanselman, you host my blog. And they're like, we have no idea who you are. Like, we don't even know. We have no customer recognition. We have no proof that you exist. So I ended up finding out that my blog was not on a virtual machine at OrcsWeb. It was actually on a physical computer under some dude's desk. And when they bought it and moved it to SureWeb, it became a physical computer in some warehouse somewhere. And I tweeted that I think my blog is down at SureWeb, and I don't know what's going on. I'm freaking out. Turns out one of the people who works at SureWeb was in the actual hosting room or whatever, like in the warehouse, doing physical stuff, and tweeted me, I'm in front of your computer right now. And this is a really interesting thing to point out, especially for younger people who don't remember before the cloud. Like before the cloud, I could be on the phone with that guy and I could ask him, put your hand on that computer and I'm going to push refresh. And he could hear it go, right? And you could, that's your computer. You could put your thumb, that's where my website is. But in the world of the cloud, you can't do that anymore because the bytes are in 3 different places and 3 different regions, right? There's no disk that you could visit and like rip the heart out of it and say, this is the blog. Now it's in the ether. But so it's really important to remember when we're teaching and we're, indoctrinating young people into what the cloud is. It's a stack of other people's computers, right? That's why whenever I teach how the cloud works, I like to pull out my, come on, computer. I like to pull out my Raspberry Pi stack, which is an array of Raspberry Pis in Kubernetes. That's a web farm. And then you get them all lighting up and you pull one out of the cloud and you say, look, see how the other ones heal. So I was out here preaching about the cloud when my computer was actually under a dude's desk in Canada somewhere. So I talked to the guy and I said, what's going on? And he says, well, your logs have filled up. And I said, that sucks. Can you delete them? So we delete the logs. And he says, the hard drive's only 30 gigs. And I was like, well, can you expand it? And he's like, it's not a virtual disk. It's like, I can't expand it. And I was like, this USB key is 32 gigs. Can you give me just a couple more gigs? Like, this is not a big thing. And they're like, well, no, this is a physical machine. It's the last one. I'm literally the last physical machine that they had forgotten about in the corner of a warehouse in Quebec. So that was awkward. And he says, I think you're just going to have to log in every day and delete the log files yourself. And I was like, I don't think that's sustainable. It was Windows Server 2008. So one of the things that also came up was when I went to securityheaders.com, and I would encourage you to do that yourself, and then go to, oh yeah, and Lewis points out, shout outs to Alex Ellis for helping me with the Kubernetes cluster as well. Thank you for that, Lewis. Go to securityheaders.com and put in your URL, and then you'll get a grade, and they'll tell you whether or not your site is, visibly secure from the outside as far as SSL and TLS. And I found that TLS 1.2 and 1.3 were not supported because they were invented after Windows Server 2008. So I was in a position where I just want my blog to work, but I'm having to mess around with like low-level SSL things that were invented after this Windows Server was a thing. I had to go back and patch it. I realized that I was living an infrastructure as a service nightmare while simultaneously talking about the cloud. I had this huge legacy pile here. So I needed to do several things in several steps. First, I've got a physical machine. Do I move it to a virtual machine? That's a question. Like, do I do a lift and shift kind of a situation where I take an image of the drive as a VHD and then just throw it up in the cloud? That doesn't solve the problem that I'm still on Windows Server 2008, right? That is only going to get older. Do I try to redeploy a .NET 2 application to Azure under Platform as a Service? Possibly could do that. I could upgrade it to .NET 4. That could be a thing. But I also have to recognize that I've got all of this running in IIS, which makes it very easy to keep track of that's an app and that's also an app, and then just have them being nested. But in the cloud, URL management is a little more complicated. If I moved the blog to, myblog.azurewebsites.net, and then this became my site.azurewebsites.net, I don't want to break 20 years of URLs, so I have to think about a reverse proxy and manage the traffic coming in and out. So that becomes a thought. So we've got URL management, we've got an old .NET framework, we've got IIS to think about. Within IIS, I've also got IIS redirects and what's called IIS rewrite.xml rules, which are like mod rewrite if you're an Apache person. I've got URLs I cannot break, right? We never, ever, like one philosophy would be like, oh, you should just move it to Jekyll. I've got 20 years of URLs, right? I got 6,000 URLs I don't want to break. So URL management, above all, cannot be a thing. I've got the issue that I publish from Visual Studio, so I'm right-click publishing. That's not a best practice, so I need to come up with a CI/CD solution. I also don't want vendor lock-in because I may not always work for Azure. Just kidding. But I want to think about that because if you're preaching about the cloud, vendor lock-in really isn't a thing anymore. Ultimately, vendor lock-in is API lock-in. You consciously or subconsciously use an API, and when you do that, you take a dependency on a system. So if you want to avoid vendor lock-in, you do it in such a way that you pick an operating system and a series of APIs that abstracts things away. So could I build this in a way that it would run anywhere? Could I build it in a way that it would run on Windows, run on Linux, run on Docker, run not in Docker, bare metal, IIS, I don't care. Could I throw it up at Google Cloud tomorrow? These are the kind of things you want to think about. Or is there an API on Azure that's just too valuable? Like if I wanted to put all of my blog posts in Azure storage, that would have me using the Azure SDK and then I'm locked down to Azure. Or could I maybe connect to the file system in a non-vendor specific way? So there's a lot of really cool opportunities here so far. Any questions yet? That was all like one run-on sentence, I realized. I'm seeing people nod, which I think hopefully they're not watching the news or something. Okay, we still good? All right, you're all very quiet. I'm just talking to myself here in my house. Okay, Anna, help me out here.
Yeah, I don't think there's no questions come through yet. I think everyone's just in awe, to be honest, Scott.
I sincerely doubt that they're in awe, but you can feel free to say that as many times as you like.
Scott, you're going to bring back this Developers Life at any point?
This Developer's Life is a podcast that I did a number of years ago. The problem is that to put together a show like This Developer's Life took nearly 40 hours of editing for each hour of audio. So the last show that I did on Faith involved music, audio leveling, minute by minute. This is a story arc. It's not just two people chatting on Skype and then editing out the ums. Without a team, I don't know how that I or Rob Connery will have the time to do that. It was a thing that we did when we didn't have kids, and this represents thousands of hours of editing. Maybe one day if I retire, I'll do it. Give me a couple of years.
We might have a few volunteers in the audience, Scott. So
I was going to say we'll be waiting for it.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. So this is a pretty classic, like, company has a legacy application and needs to make a plan. And also I'm running out of time. So what I ended up doing was first, I'll try to express this in Notepad here. First was get everything as modern as possible. So I upgraded everything to .NET 4 as fast as I could, which was actually not a big deal. DOSBlog to .NET 4 was not rocket science. Razor Pages was Razor Pages. It was 90% messing around in web configs, some NuGet packages, couple of routes in, it was not a big deal. It's surprisingly easy to get an application from .NET 2 to 4. Once I did that, it was shockingly easy to get over to .NET Core, particularly on the Razor Pages sites. Razor Pages and MVC just very nicely upgrade. Surprisingly easy. If you don't have any dependencies on COM or Windows, or if you're calling like registry stuff or doing anything that's operating system specific, it was not a big deal. Once I moved to .NET 4, then I moved to .NET Core. I picked 3.1 because it's long-term support. Only recently, literally in the last week, did I upgrade to .NET 5, and I was shocked that upgrading to .NET 5 only took me a couple of hours. It was messing around with the URLs and the pipeline in startup.cs that slowed me down. The big difficult problem, though, was web forms. And the issue here with DOSBlog is that DOSBlog is a web forms application. We go to GitHub and we look at my instance of DOSBlog here. There it is. Venerable DOSBlog. It was nicely factored, though, where there were 3 web pieces and everything else was done as runtime. We moved these to .NET Standard and found that they compiled very cleanly over to .NET Core. And on the web side, we have these things called templates, where it kind of looks like this. You've got like with Razor Pages, you have something like that, right? And then you have some URL. And with web forms, you have something like this, and that's a server-side thing. Ultimately, though, you're bringing in a view object that expresses here's the list of blog stuff that needs to be on a page. So ultimately, those standard business logic applications, we're spitting out list of blog or array of comments and stuff like that. So ultimately, everything is just text boxes over data and a for loop. I'm oversimplifying, but you get the idea. We just needed to figure out how to get these strings generated in such a way. So we ended up just going basically through the templates one at a time and changing web forms into Razor. And in doing that, we came up with a very clean templating engine. And in fact, now DOSBlog has been moved over to DOSBlog Core, being run by Mark Downey, actually from London, surprisingly enough. And Mark Downey now manages DOSBlog Core, which you can check out. It's actively developed. And in the redesigning of it, This is all Razor pages. Virtually everything else runs exactly as before. The whole runtime, he didn't even change the namespace. And in doing that, we just kept running it and looking at it and running it and looking at it. And the kinds of the classes of problems we had were like using backslashes instead of path separator. Separator. So like system, I think it's system.io.file.path separator. Because, you know, if you make an assumption about a backslash on Linux, it's not going to work, right? So going through that, making sure that we got all the Windows assumptions pulled out, allowed us to have DOSBlog running on Linux. Once I got the other two sites running on .NET Core, then it was how quickly can I run an application from the command line on my own machine without using IIS. So let me go out to the command line. Right now I'm using the Windows terminal, and you'll notice that I've got my terminal all blinged out with all different kinds of prompts that I could use. I'm using PowerShell right now, and I'm inside of a thing. I'm using an app called Oh My Posh, and it gives you a lovely prompt. So you can see that I have my GitHub here, my main. I can see the version of .NET that I'm currently using. You notice that in this folder, I'm using .NET 5.0.13, while over here I was using a preview. So you can really bling out your stuff very nicely. If you want to learn more about that, you can go and search for Hanselman Pretty Prompt, and I've got a whole blog about how to set that up. So here is hanselman.com, and if I just say .NET Run at the command line, I can hopefully run my blog. And because I'm using the Windows terminal, notice that this actually underlines the URL inside the terminal, and that's going to allow me to just click on that URL and I can visit it. So I'm in the terminal clicking the URL, and now I'm run hanselman.com. Then I added code in hanselman.com, and all this is on my blog that actually shows the version of .NET that I'm running on, because I wanted to keep track of that and make sure that I was running on the latest version, and I also wanted to advertise to people that I was in fact doing that and doing the right thing. Once I got that running on .NET, then I said I just need to get this running, building in the cloud. So I switched over to Azure Pipelines. Here's Azure Pipelines. I hate YAML. It's just a trash language, but it's pretty straightforward. Restore, build, run the tests, publish via zip. And just minutes after I got it working on Azure DevOps, GitHub Actions came out. So I feel really awesome about that. But I have Hanselman website and DOSBlog all running in the cloud. So if we go up here and say pipelines, here you go. I actually did one yesterday. Look. So here's a build that happened just yesterday. So getting that inner loop really clean was super important, but it was trivial once I had a reliable build from the command line. I know that a lot of people enjoy Visual Studio and they don't spend a lot of time from the command line, but just being able to kind of type build.bat at the command line and have a reliable build increased my trust in my system. I didn't realize that I actually lived in fear of my own website. I was afraid to change it. I was afraid to make any big moves, and that had left me. That had kind of paralyzed me and had me stuck on the older platform. Now I have a sense of confidence about my own blog and my own website. I did the same thing then to Hansel Minutes, but I went a little farther because I wanted Hansel Minutes, which is a more sophisticated app than the homepage, to run on Docker, to run on Linux, to run on Windows. And I decided to standardize on PowerShell. Now, this might sound silly. I'm not talking about PowerShell, the script, and I'm not really even talking about PowerShell, the scripting language. But I realized that because PowerShell runs on Linux, PowerShell is a reasonable bash alternative for just making something work both places, because PowerShell is easily installed on Linux, and it as a scripting language, and it's already on Windows. If you look at these PowerShell scripts, they're not really anything. Check this out. This here is called a shebang. And a shebang is the first line of a text file on Linux. On Windows, a .ps1 extension or any extension is the key to Windows deciding, oh, that's a .txt, I'll use Notepad. On Linux, extensions don't mean anything, it's just the Wild West. They look at the shebang because the shebang says, use this app. Okay, use this app to run the thing. So and what's nice about it though is it's ignored on Windows. So here I've got a very simple script that says I'm either on Windows or I'm not, and I can go and run my application, run my test run on my Windows machine or on my Linux machine, and it'll work in both places. Additionally, with .NET now, this is kind of crazy, you can actually install PowerShell by just saying .NET tool install PowerShell. So you can actually use .NET as a package manager and just install PowerShell on Linux. And in doing that, I've made my experience here very, very clean. So now I can say docker build on this Windows box here. Let's go ahead and do that. We'll go and build our little application here. This is the Hanselman, it's podcast. While that is happening, I'll point out that I'm using Docker. Simon's saying that YAML is human readable. Anything really is human readable, right? If it's text, it's human readable. XML was human readable. That was the argument that everybody made. But I think it's funny that the young people felt that angle brackets were just not where it's at. Then it was curly braces, and now it's white space. You know, so like it's just name value pairs that are nestable. We're just going to go back and forth, and in another 5 years, XML is going to become the new hotness. You watch. It'll happen. It'll come back. Human readable by psychopaths, says Toby. Toby knows. Toby gets it. Toby gets it. Okay, I am using Docker. I'm going to bring up Docker Desktop here on my other machine and bring in the dashboard. Let me bring that up on the other computer here. I got to pull it off of another monitor. Where are you, Docker? There you are. So you can see that our images are being built over here. Let's go ahead and get Docker to start up. And what's happening to my disk is getting beat up really good right here. Someone's deciding to search for an antivirus thing right now. I'll just share some threat was defined here, and then somehow my disk is being beaten up. This usually takes just seconds. I'm not sure why it caused anybody some pain here. There we go. So here we are in the some 1 gig image got made. Oh, this is actually a good point. That's a ridiculously sized image, right? So that's an inappropriately sized image. In .NET, when you're building on .NET, a lot of people conflate the build, the SDK, the compiler and the stuff with the runtime image. So it's really ideal if you can separate those things. And I'll show you how I did that. Let me switch over to the podcast site while it's building here. It'll just take a second. And I want to show you, yeah, it's actually, what it's doing right here, this is actually kind of cool. I'm sorry I'm being a little frantic here, but we've built this Docker container. We did the build for the website in the Docker container, and we are also running the tests in the container, which means I don't actually even need .NET on the machine to build and test. And I'm using Selenium and some different headless systems to go and do the testing. What I wanted to show you was the Docker file itself. Where is that? Docker file, here we go. Okay, cool. What I wanted to point out was, first line of this Docker file is the .NET 5 SDK. That's as build. We are using a .NET container image to build. Once we have built, this is important, we abandon that container because you don't want to ship the compiler. That gig is totally unnecessary. You don't need a gig worth of crap in production. You don't want to ship your compiler. So you publish out, and then you copy from the previous publish layer into a runtime layer, and you only ship the tiniest bits that you need. If you're doing a microservice and you're doing it in .NET, you can also do what's called tree trimming, which means you can give the DLL, that library, a good shake, and then shake off any of the dependencies that are not needed so that you can have the smallest possible container. And you can get a .NET image container down to 30 or 40 megs, which is a far cry from the initial larger size there, which is cool. I also want to point out that I take that build and then I make a test runner layer as well, and then run those tests and output them such that they can be brought into Visual Studio if I want. So that's cool. Okay, let's see if this worked. Cool. So that built that Docker image, and if I say Docker images, whoops, that'll fail. Come on, computer. People are watching. Ah, no. Docker images. There we go. There you go. Created 2 minutes ago. There's the podcast Docker image. Okay. Now, this has all been done in Windows. If I switch over to Ubuntu and I say Docker images, notice that I have those same images. Let me see if I can make that not scroll. There we go. Notice that I have these same images. That's because when you're using Docker Desktop with WSL, you share your Docker engine, which is really sweet. You go under Resources, WSL integration, and you turn on Docker integration with your default WSL distro, which means that Docker is Docker on your machine. I can build in Windows, I can build in Linux, whatever. I'm sharing the same Docker, which is really nice. So I can say Docker, Docker run, whatever inside of Ubuntu here, and it works exactly the same. Now I can go over here in Linux on my machine here, and I have my Hanselman website, and I can say .NET build here. Builds and runs just fine, .NET 5. Now I do need to maintain two different systems though, so if I go here in Windows Terminal, I'm going to use my left hand to press the Alt button. I'm holding down Alt whilst, is that what they say your side? Whilst clicking on Ubuntu, and now I've got split screen. Okay, so on the left-hand side, I'm going to say .NET version. Okay, and on the right-hand side, I'm going to say .NET version, -- version, pardon me. Make it better. You can see that on the one side, I've got .NET 5.0 something preview. And on the other side, I've got a slightly different version of the SDK. So there is a little bit of like two machine maintenance. But if we go into this Hanselman.com website on the Ubuntu side, I can even type explorer.exe, which is a Windows executable that I'm going to run in Linux, press dot, which means the current folder, so explorer.exe dot, press enter, and it fires up Explorer in Windows, connecting over the network, which is entirely local, and I can see that code. So then I could do something even stupider. I could type code dot and hit enter, fire up Visual Studio Code. It then installs the Visual Code server, VS Code server side inside of Linux, fires up Visual Studio Code in Windows, connecting to WSL. We've split Visual Studio into two halves. The server and the debugger run in Linux. The front end runs in Windows. So now I can be here in Windows, my preferred environment, and debug or whatever. Even more, that's not all. From Visual Studio proper, I can go and run my application in IIS Express, Kestrel, Docker, or, pause for effect, WSL2 in Visual Studio itself. So I'm here in the Visual Studio that you know and hate, and press F5, and it will go and talk to Linux, interactive debugging, whatever you want to do. Isn't that cool? Yeah, it is cool. That's the answer, by the way. Now, I had mentioned before that I've got IIS, and I've got a bunch of history and a bunch of crap that I have to deal with. One of them was redirects. The redirects will kill you, right? Let me check my schedule, make sure I don't miss a meeting. Ooh, it got canceled. Sweet. Okay, my 11 o'clock got canceled. IIS has a rewrite format, which is XML, God help us all. And it looks like this. Remember these, old people? And one of the things that I like to do is keep people from stealing my content. So, for example, there are evil people out there who go and make domains and then make a complete copy of Hanselman.com. And when they do that, it offends me. So what I do is I notice them trying to steal my content, and I change all of the images to this image. So then you'll go and find my content on the internet, and you're scrolling through it. All the images have been swapped out and changed to this image because they're mean. That's an IIS-ism, but I am no longer running on IIS, right? But the intellectual property, the work, I've done the work, right? These are all the examples of people who suck. These are all literally people who I hate. These are for testing. There's not actually a guy called superbadguy.com, but everyone else here sucks. So this work has been done. If I wanted to move that forward into Kestrel, into Docker, into whatever, it would become a whole thing, right? It would become a lot of work. And I don't want to do that because I'm lazy. All good programmers are lazy. So look at that. There is middleware for .NET that lets you ingest IIS XML format, and it turns it automatically into the appropriate format you need. If you have mod rewrite rules in Apache and whatever, that exists too. So that allowed me to decouple. Remember how I talked about this was all an exercise in coupling? My app was originally coupled to Windows Server 2008, and then I moved it away, and now it's coupled, to .NET. What is the API surface area that you're going to basically lock yourself into? I locked myself into .NET, then .NET Standard, then .NET 5. And in doing that, though, I start to have responsibility issues where, well, who's responsible for URL management and who's responsible for this? By having a piece of middleware that ingests IIS-style XML, that meant that a whole series of problems just got solved because I've shifted responsibility from one server to another. But I also removed the entire dependency on IIS. But remember the issue about URLs. Remember how I said that I'm going to run one on an Azure website and I'm going to run another on an Azure website? If you run the blog on azurewebsites.net, it's going to think that the terminating path is / myblog.azurewebsites.com / full stop. And the other one would be that. So how do I simulate nested sites? How do I have Hanselman.com be a site and /blog be another site? Anyone know the answer? While I type the answer. Anyone know the answer?
Proxy. Front
What's
door,
this?
That. Proxy.
Front door, baby. Matthew got it. Front door. Now, front door is an instance. I'm not trying to sell you front door, but it's an instance of a reverse proxy. Other answers that I would have accepted would have been Nginx, Cloudflare, etc. So what I did is I set up first a staging site because I needed to get off the Quebec machine. So I was running for months side by side Hanselman.com in Quebec on a laptop under whoever's desk, and then staging.hanselman.com in Azure Front Door. And then you set up routing rules to have the main site and the blog live side by side, but then you route with the routing rule, and then you set up path patterns to redirect. Isn't that shiny? Yes, it is shiny. And in doing that, Hanselman X forwarded 4. Always put Hanselman in front of all of your queries when you Google for things. I wrote, by the way, someone was asking earlier, did I write any of this up on my blog? First, I'm offended by the question. Of course, I wrote it up on the blog because I would forget it otherwise. So when people have been very flattering and say, oh, I found this thing on your blog, it was so helpful. It's like, no, it was written for me, not you. Because you know when you like Google for stuff and then you find yourself asking the question years ago, and you're just like, oh, I'm alone on the internet. No one cares about this problem. That's when you have to blog about it, because if you solve it and then one other person finds the answer, then you know that you're a good person and then you've saved them. Okay, so what I do here is I needed to manage this. I've got that. I need to inject that blog URL and deal with the reverse proxy. So I have to deal with my URL structure. So there's different features in .NET for things like managing the requests path base. So if the path base comes in and it's not slash, then I add that new path base. And then .NET has this feature called forwarded headers, where you can go and deal with X forwarded and X forwarded for, which are the standard headers for when you block, when you have a website behind a reverse proxy like Nginx or Apache. It's effectively allowing you to lie about URL structures. I've written all that up on the blog. It's super sweet because all you got to do is effectively do that. And since Azure Front Door adds those headers, I could have used Pandora, I could have used Cloudflare or whatever, and it works just great. I don't have staging set up anymore because staging was done as a scream test. Are you familiar with the term scream test? Right? You just unplug it and see if anybody screams. So I unplugged the blog up in Canada and nobody screamed, and I was like, okay, cool. I told them to leave it up there for 3 days. No one yelled, and now I've finally removed it. So now Hanselman.com runs on Linux, on App Service, on .NET 5.03 /blog, right, another app, is running on .NET Core 3.1 LTS, because I want that long-term support. I'm not quite ready to go to .NET 5. And I added this lovely little feature at the bottom here, which I also blogged about. I think this is actually cool. Now, I have it in public, but these are private builds and a private bit of source code because I don't want you stealing my blog. So if you click on those, you won't get anything. But if I click on those, I can go click, click, and I can show you the link, the actual, here's the diff for the source code that put this into production. Now think about like how powerful that. I can go to my production website, click on the commit, and I can say that was the commit that's live right now. And that's the pipeline log that ran. Now, what I should do is I should make a little if is admin code and only show that last bit of text if I'm admin. But imagine what you would feel like if you could log into your production website, and if you're admin or special or behind a certain IP address or only people in Wales or whatever, could go in and then see that, how powerful that would be. That's what the folks at Stack Overflow do with their stuff. They see an entirely different Stack Overflow than you do, which is pretty cool. So, and then Hansel minutes. Go down here. Same thing, different runtime, and then I got the commit and the build. Am I going to move this over to GitHub Actions? So that's a great question. So Azure DevOps works fine. When Azure DevOps stops working, I will move it to GitHub Actions. When I do new stuff, I'll move it to GitHub Actions. For example, if you go to friday.azure.com, this is the Azure website. It's managed by people who are not me. I have a weekly show here. I talk about Azure. I don't like this website. It moves slow. It's frustrating to search. So I made a vote of no confidence against this website, and I registered azurefriday.com. And if you go to azurefriday.com, it actually redirects to an Azure website that a buddy of mine in Nigeria made for me, and then I moved it to .NET 5, and it allows you to go and search instantly and find any one of the 500 episodes of Azure Friday. Okay, so this code here is running in GitHub Actions. Why? Because GitHub Actions is new and it's easy to set up. And what I ended up doing was in Visual Studio, coming soon, is the ability to go publish, right-click publish. And when you do that, you see you have Azure here, Azure website. You can basically right-click publish to GitHub Actions. because we always tease people when they right-click publish, because you're like, don't right-click publish. Nobody does that. You should have CI/CD. What if you could do right-click publish and it would generate a GitHub action for you? You would be more likely to do the right thing. And once you've done that, you're super powerful. So I did that, and in the doing of it, I got a free CI/CD pipeline. So the thing that I like about the cloud so much, and why I think we the enlightened need to get the other people excited about this, is all this stuff I'm showing you, I'm one guy. Remember how I made the joke at the very beginning of the talk where it was like, it's Hanselman Incorporated with a cast of thousands and a worldwide global footprint. No, it's just me. Like, even my kids don't know how to code. The idea that 20 years ago I would have a DevOps pipeline for multiple sites in the cloud, I would be able to go and look at a dashboard that shows you like average response and page load time, that I could go and click on failed requests, click on those, figure out what happened on this day, find out that, look, someone is trying to hit robots.txt in the wrong location, getting a 404, click on that, run a query, look at the details, then say, show me the telemetry 5 minutes before and after the event, click on that, find out who's actually hitting this site, click on that, and then find out that, let's see where this person is located, show all requests. Someone in Canada is trying to look for a PNG that doesn't exist. I mean, seriously, people. I have the power of a team of 15. And the best part is that if I was an independent consultant, I would not charge by the hour. Think about that. It make you so much more productive. No, man, you could do flat pricing now. I could give you thousands of dollars in value in minutes here. I would never charge by the hour now. I would charge flat and never show them the dashboard and what I'm able to do. I would just say, yeah, that'll take about 8 hours. I'll be back later. I do it in 5 minutes and I would hang out the rest of the day. That's the power of Azure, kids. I'm only half joking here. This is not hard. This is actually pre-generated. Azure App Service will generate that for you. If I go to Azure App Service plans, remember at the very beginning I talked about how I have some stuff on Windows, some stuff on Linux. I've got 6 sites in a basic like Baby Smash, 4 sites in the premium. So right now, if we click on this Azure App Service, which is the Linux one, I can see that I've got Hanselman.com, the blog, the podcast. I'm using about 56% of the memory, and I've got virtually no CPU. There's almost no load on this thing. And what's cool about this is, here's a pro tip if you ever move anything into Azure, it's all about the memory. That's the #1 thing that we give you that's cheap that you're not using. Cache everything. I hold almost the entire blog in memory. Why would 4 websites take 56% of the memory, especially when I've got almost 4 gigs? Because I cache everything. Cache 500 episodes of my podcast, cache 500 episodes of Azure Friday, cache 6,000 blog entries. Cache it, cache it, cache it. Don't pay for it. Azure's not selling you CPU, we're selling you buttloads of memory. Now, last thing, before we do some questions, and I got to go, is if we look at the blog, you might say, what's the database, Scott? Well, kids, there's the database. That's 20 years of blogging. I'm still scrolling. So, where do I store that? Well, with Azure App Service, I haven't done this yet, but what I could do is I could go and find the app, find the blog, click on configuration, go to path mappings, and I can mount a folder that my 20-year-old .NET blog already writes to, which is, app data / content, and I could mount it to Azure Storage. So you might have a legacy app that you're going to move into the cloud, and the app is just writing into an app data folder. Map that app data folder to Azure Storage. The app doesn't know. It doesn't use the Azure SDK. It's ignorant. And it's just going to write to there. And now you're starting to make your dumb stateful app stateless. Isn't that cool? So I'm going to end up throwing all that stuff in the cloud. And now if I go to Azure Storage Explorer, rather, pardon me. Here's Storage Explorer. I've already started doing this because once I got all this stuff moved into the cloud, I'm gonna think like, what can I start lighting up? How can I make this thing better? I don't want to just move it. I want it to be better. I moved all of my images up into the Azure Storage because people were complaining that the site was slow. So here's all the guests and their headshots, right? If we go to Hanselman, click on shows and episodes. I'm going to scroll really fast. You see how it's gray and then they load? So I put in lazy loading. If I click on one of the pictures and say open image in new tab, look at the URL. Number one thing that we have control of is that URL. So where's images.hanselminutes.com? Go back over to Azure, CDN, the blog, the edge. Now, remember when I moved everything over into the blog, everything into the cloud? Let me go and show you a horrible hack. I'll only show you. Don't tell anyone because you're going to laugh. How can I make all the images on my site faster for everyone, but I don't want to move them because there's like a lot of work there. I don't want to go and rewrite a bunch of URLs. What can I do? Here's what. Okay, let's give VS Code. And the page to show you is look at line 36. This is horrible. I hate myself for this line. Line 36. What am I doing there? When I have the blog post come out, the 20-year-old blog post, which has hard-coded URLs to images, I swap out the call for where it knows the image is to the Azure Edge, which then fails because it's a CDN. It then goes, the CDN then goes and gets it from the origin and now returns it to the CDN. So as the more people use my blog, the faster it gets. So all the images in my blog are served from the CDN. So you get the code from my the blog image. Yeah, it's kind of like a pointer, Simon, exactly. But what I'm doing is here, I'm reminding you that the URL is the number one thing that you can control. Now, ideally, I'd make it, images.hanselman.com or something like that. But this is just a test. In one line, I can turn that on or off, whether or not my entire app uses the Azure CDN. So if we go here and go to origin, you can go and create these custom origins. So it's a pass-through cache. Right? You just say images.whatever/this, and it says, oh, I don't have that. Cache miss. I'll go and get it, and I'll cache it. It's fantastic. Steve wants to know how much it costs. Well, that's a secret, Steve. I'm never going to tell you that. Let's go to cost management. Waiting for this to load. Come on, computer. I think I'm running the whole thing. I want to say 100-something bucks, 100. Yeah, so this is not true. It thinks it's going to be, this is really interesting. This forecast here looks at the trend line. I have a little credit for my MSDN, and I end up spending about 130 bucks. But what I like to do is go to the cost per resource. And you can do a cost analysis here. And I watch that trend line because the closer you get to the end of the month, oh, what do I use to hide the subscription ID? I use Azure Mask. It's a AZ Mask. You can find it on GitHub. It's a Chrome plugin that hides your Azure subscriptions. The only thing, honestly, to be frank with you, the thing that sucks the most in this cost is front door is too expensive. The blog, the app service is not costing me that much. It's a couple bucks for log analytics, a couple bucks for bandwidth. The fact that front door costs as much as the blog itself is the number one issue that I have right now. If I used Cloudflare, it would externalize the traffic a little bit. I'm not sure if I think it might be cheaper. I would argue also that the content delivery stuff now is built into Azure Front Door, so I could remove this cost by allowing Azure Front Door to handle the CDN. The reason that Front Door is expensive is that they charge per rule, which is kind of annoying. If I can click on Front Door, come on. Yeah, it'll cost me, like, they're saying it'll cost me $100. I don't think that's really true, but you can basically dig into each individual thing that it does and find out what's costing you money. So it's not, people don't use this tool enough. You can put in alerts and analysis. You can have it stop running, you know. The biggest issue with people getting nailed in Azure is just not paying attention. Like, you fire up a VM and you go to sleep. That's your fault, you know what I mean? I am aware of what it costs, and I get frustrated sometimes. But yeah, here we go. That's see this trend line here? When I turn something off, the trend line starts to flatten. So you really have to watch these things day by day. So I'm always looking at the actual cost versus the forecasted cost. Cool. Thank you. Lewis is saying, what's my opinion on running Windows containers over Linux containers? If you have to run something in a Windows container, run it in a Windows container. I mean, I run Linux because it's 30% cheaper. So it's really about the Windows license. For small apps, it's fine. If you have a Windows app and it is stateless, honestly, the hassle of Windows containers and the slow startup of Windows containers sometimes doesn't make it worth just using an Azure App Service. I think Azure App Service is ideal for Windows IIS apps. Any other questions, comments? I'm using Zoom It to draw on the screen. I can go like this. I can draw. I can hold down Control and Alt and do squares. I can change the color and do Shift and Control to do arrows. So I'm changing color, drawing, squares, arrows. Cool. Given a blank slate, what would I do differently today? If I really wanted to save money, I would probably figure out a way on Azure App Service to fire up a virtual machine and run Nginx as my own reverse proxy. But even as I'm kind of dogging on Azure, even as I'm kind of picking on Azure Front Door, it's worth pointing out that Front Door does a lot. It does a lot. It does SSL cert rotation. The SSL terminates at the front door. It's a CDN. It's a firewall. It's got a ton of features that I'm barely even touching. Like, there's managed firewall rules to make sure that, like, I don't even know what a smuggling, it sounds awesome, HTTP smuggling attack. Like, there's a ton of cool stuff that Front Door does. So I don't want to, like, say I'm paying too much for URL rewriting when in fact I'm getting managed firewall rules, SSL termination, CDN, and on and on and on. But I would probably reevaluate that one. Person named Dev, who's a guest, wants to know if they can run .NET Framework 4.8 on Linux. You cannot. You can run Mono on Linux, and you can run .NET Core on Linux. The number one thing about whether or not your app will run on Linux or not, even if it's a legacy application, is does the app have an attachment to an operating system specific thing. For example, DOS-Blog used to read time zones from the Windows registry. That's not going to work. There is no Windows registry on Linux. So externalize the problem. I need to read time zones from somewhere that has time zones. So we put it in a text file. And now I can read the time zones from a text file on Linux or Windows. So if you want to run .NET Framework 4.8 on Linux, that's the wrong question. Why does your app need to run on .NET 4.8? Why can't it run on .NET Core or .NET 5? And that's why .NET 5 is called .NET 5, because 5 is greater than 4.8. What is the difference between Front Door and APIM? API management is a smart API proxy that sits in front of your open web API apps, while front door is literally just URLs and HTTP, and it's not thinking about APIs. One is a truly smart API management system that gives you swagger and swashbuckle understanding of open web APIs, while Azure Front Door is an HTTP reverse proxy. I know, Dev, that your app is a legacy app, but so was mine. You got to ask yourself. Who would you point to look into further to Windows containers? Lewis, talk to Richard Lander, Run Faster 2000 on Twitter. All right. Cool. Anna, any thoughts, comments? John, how are we doing?
No, Scott, fantastic. Yeah, we're a little over time now, but obviously it's been absolutely fantastic to have you here as a guest.
Cool.
I don't know if there's any more questions. I think you've been doing a fantastic job to keep track of the chat, to be honest, Scott. So,
well, let me put in a couple of advertisements then before we go to our wonderful sponsors who made this possible. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Listen to my podcast. It's actually pretty good. You should check it out. I also started a YouTube channel called Computer Stuff They Didn't Teach You. And I talk about text editing. And if you're interested in Git or you're learning Git, I'm very proud of the Git 101 basics. It's pretty cool. If you're interested in drawing on your screen, I have, how to do transparent whiteboard stuff. I have classes on OBS, so I can do, cool stuff like this on my camera, and I can punch in for dramatic effect, or all kinds of cool stuff that you can do as well to make your presentations suck less. And if you're a child, you can go and join me on TikTok. I've recently started a TikTok, which is ridiculous. So check that out. Yeah, you can find me on the internet. Thank you very much for having me.
No, much appreciated, Scott. That was absolutely fantastic. I don't know if everybody wants to come off mute and give Scott a round of applause. And thank you so much for giving up your time. No, absolutely fantastic. Thanks again, Scott.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Okay. So, I mean, if having Scott Hanselman on the show wasn't as awesome enough for you, I mean, our next guest that we've got on again, I mean, I know he's had some trials and tribulations in Texas over the last few days, and he's joining us on battery power at the moment, I believe. John, is that right? But I'll hand it over to you. How are you doing, John? Thanks for joining us.
Hey, good. No, yeah, sorry for all there's been no power for the last 3 days. We have power right now, but I don't know if it's going to cut out again. So I'm doing it on my iPad just in case the power cuts out. So apologies for the camera, and I can't use the board. I'll kind of whiteboard on the iPad. But yes, Texas has been fun. It's great. It's power is optional in this state, apparently. It's good
Not
stuff.
great. No, but I mean, honestly, John, thanks so much for obviously battling through for us and joining us tonight now. So you should have access to share your screen and do what you need to do.
I will share my screen. Okay, let me just stop this. Okay, let's do something weird. Hold on. Sorry. Try that again. Okay. All right. So you should be able to see yourselves at this point, I guess.
Yeah,
okay.
That's it.
So can you see okay?
Yeah, that's great. Over to you.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
Cool. So I think the goal of this was to really just kind of talk about the resiliency in Azure, how to make sure your resiliency, and kind of what happens if you fall over and you can't get up, which is very apt right now if I walk outside my door. And this really should be a short session, because obviously you move things to the cloud and you don't have to do anything. It's just resilient automatically. You're done. We wish. That's obviously not the case at all. It's kind of the case sometimes if you're using kind of software as a service. It's kind of the case for some of the Azure services, things like Azure Active Directory and Traffic Manager and Front Door, those global type services, they are resilient by nature. We're relying on Microsoft to make sure they're available, they're doing what we need to do. But when I'm talking about IaaS services and PaaS services, we are responsible for making sure they're resilient. That's really all on us. So my goal for this session, and I guess what, I've got like 25 minutes now. I'm just trying to make sure I've got enough time.
No, you've got as much time as you need, John.
Okay. I wanted to kind of talk about the things you really need to think about. And to start with, you kind of think about, well, we talk about Azure and we talk about IaaS and PaaS and all these different things. So what exactly is Azure? Well, you'll often see me kind of talk about, so I'll draw this kind of cloud and this is kind of Azure. And I can really think about, well, Azure is fundamentally just capacity. That's really all it is. Compute capacity, network capacity, storage capacity, but it's just stuff. You'll often hear the joke about there is no cloud, it's someone else's PC. And I think the cloud's a little bit more advanced than that, but fundamentally it's true. The cloud is servers networked together, and then they provide things on top of that. The cloud doesn't run on air. There's physical things there. And that goes to the first part of when we think about, well, how do I make things resilient? Now, on top of kind of that capacity, because we don't deal directly with a CPU or memory, Azure essentially gives us various types of service. And we often think about things like, well, there's IaaS, there's storage, there's databases, there's PaaS, there's all these different types of things that kind of sit on top of that capacity. And then we have kind of that management layer arm to actually interact. The portal, the PowerShell, the CLI, they go through that management plane to actually interact with the services. So if we think about, okay, so there's that capacity, those services, what really is that? And so we draw this idea of just, well, this single cloud, but that's not really how we interact with Azure really on a day-to-day basis. We often really think about, well, there's this network. There's this huge Microsoft backbone network that Office sits on, Dynamics sits on, Azure sits on, Xbox sits on, Bing sits on, everything. And then when we think about Azure as a cloud, we often see this idea of regions. So I could think about, okay, there's this kind of sub-cloud idea that maybe that's kind of West US 1. And then there might be another cloud that's kind of East US. Then there's East US 2, West US 2, South Central, Europe, Asia, etc., etc. And they all just connect to that kind of Azure backbone. Now, within those regions, well, firstly, why do we have regions at all? What is a region? And so really a region is just defined as kind of that 2 millisecond latency envelope. So end to end, there's going to be different physical facilities in that region, but they all live within a 2 millisecond latency envelope. So end to end, I'm never going to have more than that latency for things operating within there. And the reason we care about these different regions is, well, for one thing, where am I? So if I'm kind of sitting over here, from a customer perspective, I'd like to use services closer to me so I get that lower latency, that whole speed of light problem. So I want to try and get that as close as I possibly can. But then also we may want resiliency. And so we have to kind of dive into, well, what are the things we actually care about? So if we expand out the idea of kind of a really what is kind of one of these regions. And again, there's no magic here. Fundamentally, we have to have a server. We have to have, actually, funnily enough, more than one server for Azure to actually run on. I keep putting my thumb on the camera, apologies. I'm not used to doing this on an iPad. And obviously they live in racks. So we have lots and lots of servers living in racks. So we have lots and lots of different racks. Well, those things can fail. A server can fail, the rack can fail, the top rack switch can fail, the power supply unit can fail. And then all of those racks live within a certain physical facility. So there's a certain data center. And then within that region, well, they probably have lots of different physical data centers. So this is all within kind of, and the whole idea being that really that 2 millisecond latency envelope that really makes up the region. And it is important to note that there's always this big emphasis in Azure that we think about this, the software provides the resiliency. But to be honest, right now, Texas is a fantastic example of this. Obviously, South Central region is in Texas, and it's still running. So while most of Texas is kind of got no power, no water, it's just grim, South Central is still running. These data centers, yes, the resilience comes from the software replicating between different servers, different data centers. But these physical facilities, I mean, they are built to be super resilient. They have thousands of batteries strung together to give you kind of that amount of time required to kick over and start these massive diesel generators to generate their own power with days of fuel on premises so they can keep things running. They have these huge water tanks so that even if there's a blip in the water supply, they can keep the things cool. And so just the bare basic infrastructure is designed to be super, super resilient. The data you write is durable. There's never less than 3 copies of your data. You create a basic storage account, a basic managed disk, there's 3 copies. Locally redundant storage, LRS, there's 3 copies. Maybe that's it within one cluster. Maybe it's spread over different physical buildings in the region, like ZRS. Maybe there's 3 copies replicated in another region as well, with things like GRS. But the durability is something that's just kind of native to that platform. I generally don't worry about that type of thing. And so the point here is if a server breaks, if a rack breaks, that's generally not something that I super worry about. That's going to get fixed. It will heal. It will kind of just rehydrate my machine. But what I don't want is that gap, because obviously if I just deployed a single virtual machine on this node here, that particular blade, right, and that fails, it will restart my VM on another rack, but it's going to be down for a period of time. So that would kind of be a problem. So we want to try and avoid that by making sure, well, maybe we deploy on this rack over here as well. We like to have multiple instances. Now, before we think about things just necessarily going wrong, because things can break, there's the idea of just regular maintenance, just regular rolling out stuff in Azure, because obviously Azure has a hypervisor. In the IaaS world, where it's a virtual machine, you're responsible for patching your virtual machine. So inside that VM, there's a guest, and that guest has to be patched. Azure is not responsible for doing that. It can help you do it. There is automatic kind of patching available, but we're not talking about that patching. These nodes that are running Hyper-V, they have to be patched themselves. Now, Microsoft have put in a huge amount of work. They don't generally reboot the host very often anymore. They have the ability to hot patch even the kernel. They have things like VM preserving host updates, so it can pause your VM for a few seconds, do things to the host, and then bring it back out of this pause state. There's even the ability that for some virtual machines, they can live migrate. Now, that's not something that's commonly done a huge amount, but it's moving more and more, that they can actually move you to another node. But ordinarily, there isn't kind of going to be this impact on your virtual machine for their maintenance. Now, occasionally something might kind of pop up, in which case you're kind of told about it. You get this notification of, hey, maintenance is coming. Normally it's about 30, 35 days you should get. And you can actually pick to kind of, well, do the maintenance now. I don't want you to do it on your time. I want you to do it absolutely now. And the way that kind of works is if you say, hey, look, I want to do this now, it will just basically shut down your VM and start it again on another node that's already been patched. That's how that kind of self-maintenance works. Oh, he's saying it's frozen. Can't see my screen. Okay, let's reshare. stop presenting. And share again. Can you see now?
Not come through yet.
I could try exiting.
Yep, got you now, John.
Got it now? Okay, that's weird.
That's it.
Okay. Okay. So if I think about kind of, I have this kind of self-maintenance capability that I can do. It will tell you. So if you actually go and look at the portal, for example, if you look at your virtual machines, for example, you'll actually see that there is kind of this ability to add maintenance. So if you scroll over, you can kind of see this maintenance status, maintenance self-service, maintenance scheduled. So you can actually kind of see all of those different things available. Oh. And you can add those columns. If you do edit columns, you can kind of add those to your workloads. If you actually went to kind of help and support and look at service health, again, you can kind of go and see planned maintenance in there. So that's kind of an important thing just to keep an eye on. If you have dedicated hosts or isolated virtual machines, then you actually can pick a maintenance window because it's only you on the box. So you can kind of have full control of actually when that happens. But outside of dedicated or isolated, you obviously can't pick your own maintenance window on kind of a rolling manner. But what you can do is actually say, hey, go and do this right now. Okay, so if we go back over here, so what are the constructs that I can kind of think about? How do I make my service as resilient as possible? And it really comes down to this idea that, well, I drew this idea of different racks, and I drew this idea of kind of these different physical buildings. And these are exposed to you. So we can really think about the idea that, okay, for me deploying my services, those racks are exposed to me. So if we just really draw this out, the idea, okay, we can think about there's these multiple racks. And for the first method we can use, and we're kind of trying to move away from this, is something called availability sets. And this has been around forever. This was kind of the original thing we had in Azure. And it really boils down to the idea of fault domains. So you'll see this kind of fault domain 0, 1, and 2. And really a fault domain is just a rack. Now, these are all within the same cluster. So it's all within the same building. And what we would do is you have this idea of 3 fault domains, but you also have the idea of update domains. So, and the update domains would range from kind of 5 to 20. You can kind of pick those. And the idea of the update domains is when Microsoft are doing their maintenance, it will only roll out the updates, one update domain at a time. So it will never take down more than, if you have 5 of them, a 20th of your workload. And what you would do is you would create your virtual machines in an availability set, and it would kind of just automatically rotate them around the 3 racks that have been allocated to a particular availability set. So I don't pick a rack. I say, hey, put these in this availability set, and it would just kind of rotate them around. So this is what we kind of consider the bare basic. For instances, this would give you a pretty good level of resiliency from any kind of node or rack level failure. So that was all well and good, but then people were like, well, what about if a building has a problem? What about if the building has a power, or the building has a cooling, or the building has a network? So that's when you actually got into this new thing called availability zones. So if I drew up here this idea that there's multiple buildings within a particular region, what actually now happens is they are exposed to you in your subscription. Now, not every region today supports this. If we actually go and look at all of the different regions in Azure, you can actually see there's a row here about availability zone presence. It's kind of that third row down. And it shows you kind of central US has 3, east US, they'll always have 3. Some of them it's kind of coming soon. Some of them don't have it, and it will tell you the closest region that has zones. Now you might wonder, why doesn't everything have zones? And it really comes down to the fact that it's not just a physical building, separate buildings are required. The whole point of availability zones is, yes, I think about there are these different physical facilities within a particular region, but they have to have, the idea is independent kind of power, cooling, i.e. water, and network. So each of them has those independent sets of utility, network, and everything else. And so the idea here is, okay, so I saw the question, is there a typical distance between availability zones? No. It's definitely not 300 miles. 300 miles is never going to be 2 milliseconds. So remember, a region, these are all within a region. So there is a 2 millisecond latency envelope for these availability zones. There is a goal, I think, long term to try and get a couple of miles maybe between availability zones to get some distancing, but that's not there today. In many regions, you'll find these buildings are the line of sight. They may be like a couple of 100 yards away. So it does vary, but no, there is no guaranteed distance between availability zones. The point of the availability zones is it gives me a certain level of guarantee that, hey, a power issue, a network issue, a cooling issue is not going to mess up my workload. Now, the reality is there's probably lots of buildings within that particular region. There might be 16, there might be 32, there might be lots more. And so what happens is I get a certain subscription. So subscription is kind of that unit of where we can create resources. So my subscription 1 will only ever see 3 availability zones. So I see AZ1, AZ2, and AZ3. Now for my subscription 1, AZ1 might be that building, 2 might be that building, 3 might be that building over there. Then I get a second subscription 2, and it has AZ1, 2, and 3. Well, its AZ1 might be that building, AZ2 might be that building, AZ3 could be that building. So availability zones are guaranteed to be different physical structures with independent power, cooling, communications, but there is not a building called AZ1. There is no correlation between different subscriptions. It just gives me a guarantee that I have that resiliency against a building level failure. And so here the point is, when I create resources, now instead of putting them in an availability set, I would pick a certain availability zone. So it now gives me that resiliency from a building level blast radius. And that's really what we're protecting from. So if you think about availability set, what is kind of that explosion that I can survive? Well, I can survive an explosion of kind of a rack failing. If the whole building goes, those racks are in the same building. So availability sets give me protection from a node or rack failure. Availability zones give me protection from an entire building, because now my resources for like sub 1, I would have resources in this building, and this building. For sub 2, well, it has resources in those buildings. So now any particular building problem impact in this case, kind of a third of the resource. And remember, we talked about updates as well. So each availability zone is also kind of an update domain. So when Microsoft rolls out updates to its infrastructure and its services, it's never going to update more than one availability zone at a time. So, hey, it'd roll out updates to kind of that first building, AZ1, then it would roll out updates to AZ2, and then updates to AZ3. So that's kind of the key point between those availability zones. Now, if you have a choice, use availability zones. It's just more resilient. In terms of blast radius, it gives me a better resiliency than availability sets, but obviously not all regions have them. Now, how you use them really varies by service. You'll often see when I'm deploying a service, you might see kind of the idea of kind of a regional deployment. You might see kind of a zone redundant, and you might see zonal. You'll kind of see these three options, depending on the service. Now, if you pick regional, putting it somewhere, it's going to a particular building, but have no control over that. You just don't know. It's not zone redundant. It's just there somewhere. If you pick zone redundant, well, the service will automatically distribute it over multiple AZs. So it might be using AZ1 and AZ2 and AZ3. It's going to do that for you. So it's resilient. If it's zonal, you pick the AZ, but it's only in one AZ. So maybe I'm putting it in AZ2. And that can be useful as well, because maybe I deploy multiple services and I'll have an instance in AZ2, an instance in AZ1, an instance in AZ3. But it is important to understand the difference between them. Some things, hey, they're just zone redundant. I don't really have to worry about it. Other things, well, I can pick the availability zone, but now I need to make sure, well, I also have instances of that service to another availability zone as well, so I'm resilient. Some services, well, if they're going to work with zones, it has to be a certain SKU, like load balancers. If I want to be able to do kind of that zone redundant or zonal, I have to do things like, well, there's a standard SKU. So I have to pick kind of that standard load balancer, the standard public IP, for example, to be able to take advantage of that. So we need to understand those things. And as I architect my service, don't have cross-zone requirements or dependencies. It's no good, hey, I'm architecting my service and I craft this beautiful compute set of service over here where I'm using kind of my AZ1 and my AZ2 and my AZ3, and I have my VMs nicely kind of scattered over. I'm super proud of myself. I've got zone redundant storage, and I've got a standard load balancer, so it's distributing between them. I'm feeling really good. And I do something silly like, well, I'll use a zonal NAT gateway in AZ1. Well, now if AZ1 goes down and all of the services are actually talking to that zonal NAT gateway, they're going to go down as well. So as I think about how I can actually use these in the best way, understand that, hey, if I'm doing these kind of zone redundant architectures, make sure everything is zone redundant. I'm not accidentally putting in some dependency on something in a different zone that would then take down my entire service. I'm cognizant of time. I know you said I can go as long as I want, but I know I'm supposed to finish now and people are, I think, probably having to stop. So this is within a region. Availability sets, availability zones give me resiliency within the region, and that's great. That there can be region level problems. Now, Microsoft has never failed over a region at this point. It's never happened. But there have been regional problems. They've just never done a failover because of, I think, the implications of doing that are obviously huge. So if I want to be protected against the idea of, remember we had that map, we had the pretty picture of the world, Microsoft always tries to put at least 2 regions in any geopolitical boundary. The idea of that is it enables me to deploy my services, have data replicated, and this is where that number, I saw someone type like 300 miles. So there is a goal for the paired regions to be hundreds of miles apart, because that means, hey, if there is some sort of geographical disaster, earthquake, flood, hurricane, it shouldn't take down the regional pairs. Or if it does take down the regional pairs, we probably don't care anymore because we've got bigger problems. And so this is all great. This is all within a particular region. So I could draw that idea of the availability zones and the availability sets. Maybe this is kind of West US 2. What I would do is I would also use another region. Now, Microsoft does actually pair its regions together. So if we actually look at the business continuity site, it talks about paired regions. And what you'll actually see is for every region, there is a pair. So you can see here, West US 2, for example, is paired to West Central US. So if I went back to my map, so this would be West Central US. They are paired regions. Now, what does that mean? What does the pairing mean? Why do I care? There's a number of different aspects to the regional pairing. Now, there are some services that use that pairing. A very obvious one is things like storage. If you do GRS for your storage account, then you have 3 copies of your data over here, and you have 3 copies of your data in the paired region. So that's kind of from a storage account. Now, many things sit on top of a storage account. So like Azure Backup, it can replicate the data. It uses those same regional pairings. Things like Azure Key Vault, it replicates your secrets, your keys to the paired region. And so there's certainly a certain aspect of, hey, using those regional pairs, in the event of a disaster, I would fail over to that paired region, because if I'm using those services, well, they're natively already replicating to that particular paired region, i.e. West Central US in this particular point. Now, sometimes there are concerns. It's like, well, I don't want to fail over to the paired region because everyone else is failing over to the same paired region. What if it runs out of capacity? Now, Microsoft plans for this, obviously. As part of the capacity planning exercise, they do obviously look at the paired regions. They do look at the services being leveraged, so the capacity should not be a concern. You don't have to use these paired regions. Many services let you pick. If I'm doing databases, for example, I can pick to add an async read replica at any region I want. Cosmos DB, I can add anything I want. You are not restricted to these. But understand, there is a certain automatic pairing today, and there are some changes coming around this between certain regions. But there might be a bigger reason you want to use the paired regions. And it really comes back down to the idea of, well, Microsoft makes service updates. When Microsoft makes a service update, they kind of deploy in rings. And so they deploy into kind of these test rings first, and then they deploy to regions. They will never deploy an update to a service to the paired regions. So if there's like a new storage account service update rolled out, it would never go to West US 2 and West Central US at the same time. The idea of thinking that, hey, if they deployed some service update that somehow managed to get missed in the earlier rings of testing, they would not take down your primary and the DR site. So that's why using the paired regions actually can give you, hey, not just some services use that pairing, that's actually not the biggest deal. The bigger deal is the fact that Microsoft services will not roll out the same update to those paired regions at the same time. So it gives me kind of that additional resiliency. So if I think about, hey, I want to make my service resilient. If it falls over, and I want to make sure it doesn't just die. Within region, yes, I'm using availability sets, I'm using availability zones, but I want to make sure I'm deployed to at least 2 regions. And within the other region, I'd be using the same thing. Ideally, hey, I'm using kind of availability zones over here as well. And I've got my resource kind of deployed over here as well. And I'm kind of good to go. Now, in the old days, we always thought about kind of disaster recovery. We would always think about, well, I've got an active and I have a passive. In the cloud, we might actually think about, well, do I just run active? The cost of running 2 in West US 2 and 2 in West Central US is the same as running really 4 in West US 2. It costs me the same amount of money. Now, you do have to consider your service. The biggest problem is data. It's super easy to think about, well, I've got a region here and a region here, and I can run VMs. This could be region 1, that could be region 2. That's easy. But what about the database? That stateful layer. Databases tend to like a single master, a single writable copy of the database. So now this poor compute service on the other side is like, well, what do I do? Now I can absolutely have a read replica. I can asynchronously replicate over, and this could be readable. But if this VM wants to do a write, it has to go all the way over the wire to write to that copy. Well, is that okay? Sometimes it is. You can absolutely handle that for some types of application that maybe can handle latency, that are mainly read applications. They're not doing a lot of writing. But that's what makes it complicated. As soon as I start trying to go active across regions, suddenly the speed of light is really slow. And it really can impact the ability for me to do things. I don't want to do all my read-write operations over 30, 40 milliseconds of latency. Most apps would start to suffer, especially if they're chatty. If it's mostly read, which a lot of apps are, maybe that read replica can work, and then the writes can kind of travel over. I can make that function. Things like Cosmos DB, well, they actually let me have different kind of consistency capabilities where I can have kind of a session level in each region, and it will make itself consistent over time. So there are ways to solve it, but realize that trying to go active is often an app architecture, and really it's the database that becomes the pain point in being able to do that. So depending on your workload, you may have to kind of stick to an active passive even between multiple regions. The final thing, and again, I'm cognizant of time, how do you balance between these things? Like if I'm using multiple regions, within a region, it's easy. Within a region, hey, I could have this service here, and I drew this picture of a standard load balancer. So I have this kind of standard load balancer thing here that has a front end IP address, and it can just balance between all the things within the region. But if I'm now going multi-region, how does that work? And there's actually different solutions. So it's funny, Scott was talking about kind of Azure front door, and there are really 2 primary solutions today how we think about balancing between regions. One of them is Traffic Manager. So Traffic Manager is essentially DNS. You have a DNS name, and when you query that DNS name, it will resolve to possible targets. So it could be the target over here, it could be the target over here, really depending on where you are as the client, if you're using kind of a performance mode. And so that works with anything, because it's just a DNS resolution. What's nicer is Azure Front Door. So with Azure Front Door, remember we drew this idea, let's go back to our picture. We had this massive Microsoft network. So also off of this massive Microsoft network are lots of edge locations. there's all these kind of points of presence connected to the Microsoft backbone. So what Azure Front Door is, it takes your service and it now offers it via this Anycast IP address. So now at any of these points of presence, if I'm this user over here, remember, I can go to that IP address and it's going to go to the one closest to me. If I was over here, it would go to the one closest to me. And it will then terminate the connection. So it's going to do kind of a split TCP idea. So me as the user get a really good experience, because what it does is it establishes kind of that TCP session here and kind of the SSL session here. And then I ask for content and then it goes on the Microsoft backbone and gets it. Now, if West US is closer, it gets it from there. If West US was down, well, it would go to West Central US or East and get it from there. And it will fetch a big chunk of content and then feed it to me in little chunks as my app requires. So Front Door doesn't just enable me to kind of give me resilience across regions, it will actually improve the experience because it will terminate my connection near to me and then feed me the content as I need it after fetching it over that kind of global backbone. So I'm going to use things like Traffic Manager for anything, or if it's HTTP, HTTPS, I can use Front Door to enable that kind of bridging across the regions. And so I'm going to stop there because, again, I know I'm well over time and I apologize. Yeah, I mean, I think really that's the key point. And I guess some other stuff I was going to cover, but I mean, the key point here is when you think about resiliency within a region, make sure you're using ideally availability zones, but at minimum availability sets. Make sure you look at your application and make sure you don't have like a cross availability zone dependency so that if a particular AZ failed, it takes down your whole app. And then think about, really, I want to deploy to at least 2 regions that also can improve my end customer experience. But again, now it gives me resilience from a region level problem. And I can use things like Azure Traffic Manager or Azure Front Door. And soon there'll be a global load balancer that enables you to redirect to load balancers within regions to actually distribute that kind of global content. So with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Fantastic. Thanks, John. I think you have got a couple of questions. So Sebastian, I don't know if you want to come off mute and just ask John your question that you put in the chat.
Yes, sure. One of our customers reported a behavior of Azure App Services. So in terms of resiliency, when they have 2 or more instances of an Azure App Service plan, they fail like 10 minutes every 2 or 3 months. So my question would be, are they by design on different update domains, fault domains, or even on different availability zones?
So regular app service plans will go over availability sets. They don't, to my knowledge, they do availability zones unless you do an app service environment. But an app service plan will split over multiple availability. It will use availability sets. So you've got multiple fault domains and multiple update domains. Yes, it will use those.
Okay, so normally there would not be a chance that some kind of maintenance window occurs on both at the same time.
I would not expect that, no.
Okay, thanks.
Cool.
So
great YouTube channel, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I mean, make sure they have more than one instance. I mean, you do send, I think, 2 or more instances. Yeah, I mean, it should definitely spread it over multiple fault domains. So the fact that it's happening regularly, yeah, I mean, I would get them to raise a ticket. That's very odd. That shouldn't happen. No.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, John. I think Simon's got a question as well around. I mean, Simon, do you want to come off mute and ask John? If you're there.
Yeah, sorry. It's just basically I think you said about active passive, and I think standby warm is an active passive failover.
Yeah, I mean, there's different terminology for it. I mean, really, you're picking that in your design. So if I'm using multiple regions, I can decide that, hey, I'm only actually serving live content from one region, so the other one is kind of standby. Or I could do active-active. I could be serving from both of them if I'm using some kind of like balancer between them. So that's really you from an app architecture, how you want to deal with that. There isn't really a concept in Azure so much as kind of a standby region. Certain services will have that, like GRS. It replicates to the paired region, and then you can actually choose now to switch over, so you can make one the active. But really, the idea of do I have a standby region, that's just your app architecture.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. That's clarifying my architecture side.
Cool. Has anybody got any other questions? I'm scrolling up. It looks like you've been having some good chatter through John's session there. Has anybody got anything else to ask while we've got John?
Superman. I've got a lot of Iron Man things, but see, I got Superman stuff as well. I forgot the thing, and Batman, all sorts of junk in my office.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, it goes without saying, John, thanks so much for fighting against the forces that were trying to stop you for joining us tonight. It really is appreciated. Yeah, thank you. I mean, if everybody can come off mute, give John a round of applause. That was a fantastic session. Thanks, John.
Thanks for apologies.
No, not at all. Thanks so much. Exactly. Yeah, he can charge a UPS now a bit longer.
Well, thank you.
Right. Thanks very much, John. Thanks a lot. Okay, so don't go anywhere, everybody. We've got the quiz to come. I'm going to hand over to Griff in a second, but before I do, I just wanted to just quickly point out that we still got the Twitter and LinkedIn competition going to win yourself a Microsoft exam voucher. Tweet the exam you're going to take with the hashtag WAEG at Welsh Azure. And on that note, Griff, you're good to take over and get on with the quiz.
Yes. Welcome everybody to the quiz. Anna, you got it shared, yeah? I don't know if everyone has played Coop before, but hopefully you've got it downloaded on your app. If you could enter the game pane at the top, and we'll start seeing your names pop up.
So I think what we're going to do, Griff, we're going to give £50 voucher to first place. I mean, it's up to you. Do you want to give first and second prize, or do you want to save the other prize for people who leave us feedback at the end? What do we think?
It's up to me, is it? I didn't know this. This is a lot of responsibility, John. You just sprung this on me.
Power is in your hands.
Yeah, have we got anything for feedback otherwise?
There's a slide at the end where there's a QR code that so we got two £50 vouchers to give away, and we got the 10 Microsoft exam vouchers that we're going to do on the Twitter feed. So your call, Griff, if you want to give first and second place, or if you want to hold back for one.
Yeah, we've got to give some of the feedback if we haven't got anything already.
Yeah, so stay tuned. After the quiz, I'll flash up a slide, everyone, with a QR code. If you're cool to hang on and give us some feedback, what we'll do, we'll pick a winner at random tomorrow and obviously get back to you.
Yeah, and second place is still, second, isn't it? You got to win.
It's kudos. It's kudos, surely. You got second place. You haven't got a £50 voucher, but you nearly got it.
Cool. Should we take that as everyone? I don't know if anyone wants a message if they're having any trouble. If not, we'll go for it in a minute.
How many have we got? We've got over 50 people in the chat. So yeah, if anybody is struggling, quickly type us a message. Otherwise, I guess we could start.
Yeah, just so everyone knows, it's going to be my voice, but it's going to be Anna's control. So we'll see how this goes now. There's a little bit of lag. It's that sort of Pacific Rim thing going on. Hopefully it'll be a welcome return of the Azure icon quiz for people who did it last time. We got a couple of them chucked in. I do love a bit of Azure icon quiz.
We good to go, Griff? Oh, we still got a few more
still
coming in,
popping up.
actually. We're on 37.
Word is out now. There's more people just joining from around the world, I think.
I got more than £50 voucher.
Yeah, I think we'll have to cut off soon and just go for it.
Yeah.
Reconnecting's freaking me out. I hope that's a joke name, is it?
Okay. We good to go, Griff?
Yeah, I'm good.
Awesome.
Oh, when you create a new storage account file share, soft delete is enabled by default for how many days? Yep, 14 days. If you accidentally delete that file share, you can still get it back after 2 weeks. And that's after watching some of John Savill's videos, so I don't know if he's still there, but yeah, I've done my research. Just shout out to Microsoft, please get this enabled on Azure Data Lake Gen 2 as soon as you can. But we'll move on with that. Azure boy number 1. Which of these is an extremely compact executable of a number of Unix utilities? Inspired by some of Hanselman's latest videos. It was a busy Sunday evening trying to research all of John Savill's and Scott Hanselman's YouTube videos to figure out what to put in this quiz. That's right, busy box. Ross at number 1. So which of the following allows you to run Linux machines on Windows?
I think we should all get this right.
We should now, yeah. Hey, Whistle, yeah, that's the one, or Whistle. Oh, no change at the top. So which of the following technologies is used to orchestrate containers? Kubernetes, Docker, Ubuntu, or KubeString? That's right, Kubernetes. What is the smallest deployable unit in Kubernetes? Is it a node, a pod, a container, or a cluster? The images sometimes help, sometimes they don't. There we go, that one did help. Pod is the smallest deployable unit in Kubernetes. Oh, Dean's at the top. Where's Ross gone? Ross is off the table. I didn't even see that. True or false? We definitely know this one now. Or do we? That's right, everyone's favorite markup language, YAML. Brazil data center is paired with central US. True or false? It's false. Azure Active Directory is globally resilient. True or false? That's right, it's true. When the world ends, we can still log in. It's all good. Which Azure service does this icon represent? That's right, that was the Internet of Things. Which Azure service does this icon represent? Is there a cloud service, a web job, an automation account, or an Elastic job? That's right, it was a web job. Well done, 20 of you. I think all the icons are going to appear at the end of this quiz now. Yep, which Azure service does this icon represent? Is it Purview, Sentinel, Synapse, or Application Insights? That's right, it's Purview, the new sort of governance data discovery tool by Azure. Very cool. Which Azure service does this icon represent? Is that Cognitive Services, Synapse, Machine Learning, or Power Apps? That's right, Synapse, the big analytical tool from Azure. Which Azure service does this icon represent? Is it Azure Container Instance, HD Insight, Azure Virtual Machine, or Azure Box Cloud? That's right, it was Azure Container Instance. Well done, 14 of you.
We are flying through this.
Okay, so what Azure Resiliency construct allows Microsoft to upgrade the OS without impacting your workloads? Is it a fault domain, an update domain, an upgrade domain, or a patching domain? That's right, it was an update domain. Again, from some of John Saville's courses on YouTube. Very good stuff.
Last question, Griff.
Yeah. So close.
Are we ready? Fastest finger first.
So which of the following Azure regions does not support availability zones? Is it UK South, North Europe, Japan East, or Chile? That's right, it's Chile. Although it is on the roadmap, I believe, from looking on the website. By something like 2025, Chile will have it as well, along with a host of other things.
Should we get a drum roll? Are we ready?
Who the winner is?
Let's go.
Number 3, Thomas T. Number 2, Jack Roper. And at number 1 is Mr. Dean. Well done, Dean.
Indeed.
Although I do feel like I've got to admit I got one of the questions wrong. So I've got to humbly say Chris called me out on it as well, and I will blame the mead. So I hope Dean had the wrong one. It's not yet another markup language. Is YAML ain't markup language. I don't know where I got that from. I think I made it up. So YAML stands for YAML ain't markup language.
Brilliant. Well done, Dean. If I know who it is, yeah, it's you, Dean. All right, I know your email address then. Right, cool. Well, brilliant. Stick around. I'm going to share my screen a second, and we will. If you can leave us some feedback now, I'll share the QR code, and we'll pick another winner at random tomorrow or the next day. So, thank you everybody for joining. Hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have putting it together for you. Obviously. Thank you so much to Scott Hanselman and of course John Savill for 2 amazing, obviously I'm sure you'll all agree, amazing talks that we've had this evening. Don't forget, bookmark our next Welsh Azure user group session. It's the Lightning Talks in March. We got 7 fantastic people out in the community that are coming to give you sort of 10 to 15 minute talks each, and as you can see there on the screen, it's over a mixture of different topics related to Azure. So please RSVP, and we look forward to seeing you in March. On that note, there's your QR code. If you could all jump onto that web form and let us know your feedback, we would be much appreciated. On behalf of everybody at the Welsh Azure user group, thanks for coming, guys, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks, guys.